Good morning, everyone. I want you to have in your imagination a sort of spectrum. At one end of the spectrum, you've got the so-called cults. And at the other end, you've got mainstream religion. And the two are supposed to be in no connection at all with each other. Because on one side, the cults might be represented as being a bit, I wrote down the word flaky, but certainly unstable religious phenomena. They tend to have powerful people who exercise their will over the groups they organize. And above all, cults are very ephemeral. They're here today and gone tomorrow. In other words, they have no long-term functioning. At the other end, you've got the mainstream, what we call denominations. They have structure, they have history, they have rules, they have methods, they have processes. And hopefully, they have accountability. That's a problem for our Church of England at the moment over the sex abuse scandals that have been emerging. But if you mix the two, what I call the culty and the mainstream denominational, you get something which has a tendency to be unstable itself. And that's the basic focus of what I'm going to say this morning. The Church of England being an institution which has allowed itself to become subject to the flakiness of the cults. Now, I wrote this down, which is, sorry, some of the words are obscured, but these are the sort of things you will recognize as being part of what I call the cultic phenomena in religious groups. A charismatic leader, possibly strong control of personal lives of individual members, very strong approach to sexual matters. And this is why we have this, I would call it an obsession with what people do in their bedrooms. I can't see that really it's much to do with religious growth and experience. And they're very good, money often appears in cultic literature and cultic practice. They're very good at spending money, buying the latest airplane or big house, whatever it is. And there's an area where I personally spoke on ostracism at Stockholm in 2015. And again, the cults are very good at keeping people out and making people frightened to leave. And then there's the ideology, belief system, and most cults and indeed Christian groups, which are cult-like, have an idea of inerrant scripture. And then there's frequent exposure to mind-numbing spiritual activity. And this will, in most cases, be to do with gospel singing. People kept singing for 3/4 of an hour, end on end, to soften them up for the word. Again, I'm being a little bit cynical, but this is what I observe. Now, the church cults, I call them, which I'm talking about, will always want to be respectable with the center. They want to get some of the kudos of being part of the wider denomination. And they will have their clergy or their leaders ordained into the Anglican Church. And this can cause problems for them. Now, I'm doing simplifications today, and I want to talk about the evangelical streams being one of two emphases. I call them the Calvinist and the charismatic. This description is very much about the English situation. The Calvinist group have only really been powerful in the Church of England since World War II, and leadership of John Stott and a number of leading old congregations in Britain, in England. These groups have maintained themselves very much away from the mainstream of the church, but they've had very strong links with the establishment, leading public schools. These are private schools, but they're where the elite are educated. And then we have the charismatic manifestation of evangelicalism, particularly since the arrival of John Wimber in the 90s. And they emphasize Holy Spirit teaching, healing, and prophecy. And we have Vineyard and other networks. They're much more popular than the Calvinist manifestations. Jokingly, we say that charismatics put the fun back into fundamentalism. But they all emphasize biblical preaching. And obviously, very few preachers are rigorously fundamentalists in terms of preaching inerrancy. They will make exceptions. And so they use this expression, the Bible clearly teaches. Well, of course, we all know, those of us who study the Bible know the Bible is very unclear about what it thinks about things, many institutions, and ideas about sexual behavior. Now, my first Calvinist example is a church in Wimbledon, which is near London, and it's called Emmanuel Church Wimbledon, ECW. And it's under control of Calvinist conservative evangelicals whose loyalty to the Church of England is minimal, but they want the kudos of being called Anglicans, although they give no money, receive no money, and keep themselves very much to themselves. And they have no contribution either financially or structurally or organizationally to the rest of the church. But this church, ECW, has been a quiet powerhouse of conservative evangelical practice over quite a number of years. But it's where the scandals have come from, or one lot anyway. Now, this particular character, Jonathan Fletcher, has come into notoriety in the last couple of years because although he was, if you like, more powerful than any bishop in the Church of England because of the way he controls networks of conservative Calvinist evangelicals, he has been proved to have had a rather shady past. I mentioned that he comes from a powerful family, socially powerful, and he was connected to the summer camps for well brought up and well selected young men, and there's been a scandal over that, which I talked about last year. And Jonathan Fletcher is right at the very heart of this Calvinist evangelical network, and he's a bit like a kingmaker. If you have to know him to get promotion within that world. So his power went far beyond his London church. And he had 30 years at Emmanuel Church Wimbledon. He didn't look for promotion, but meanwhile, within his networks, he was operating very much like a bishop. And he had groupies. People used to flock to him to hear and he organized a conference, and people would go to learn about preaching. And those people going to sit under him included bishops of the Church of England. Well, he's not so powerful now. He was born in 1942, so he's over 80. He's beginning to fail physically. But then we found that he was a subject of scandal, and there was a report, 31.8, that examined his legacy of spiritual abuse over the whole period of his time at ECW. In other words, there was a cult going on within the Church of England, and it represented quite an important part of the conservative Calvinist evangelical network in Britain. And the scandal has still been being processed to this day. Now, this is a list of the issues that were identified by the report that was made: psychological domination, manipulation, bullying, and the humiliation, controlling behaviors. We recognize all these words from Celtic literature, and I just put that there for completion. I didn't write those items. And there was the finance thing comes in, the power thing comes in, and the sexual thing comes in. He was giving them, young men, naked massages. He was receiving them, and he was pressuring young men to share in naked showers, etc. So all this was going on within, just repeat, a powerful church, a powerful individual within the network of conservative evangelicalism. And many of our leading bishops had passed through the influence of Jonathan Fletcher, or certainly knew him. Now, this is, if you like, a kind of halfway house within my talk about what I think makes Jonathan Fletcher as I won't say typical, he's not a typical clergyman, but it's typical behavior that we would expect to find in a Celtic group. The group tolerates the abusive behavior because of the unchallenged charisma of the leader. Well, that's something we recognize from Celtic groups outside the established church. And when they go on about truth, the truth of the Bible, the truth really in operation is not the Bible truth, it's actually the truth of which supports the power of the individual who's in charge. All claims for scriptural infallibility are in fact claims for the leader's infallibility. If you can say, this is what the Bible said, this is what I say, this is all about power, using the Bible to exercise power. And much of the teaching that is going on in these churches is about maintaining the power of the people in charge. Now, this is, I offer this little extra bit, the Narcissistic Exchange principle. I think I don't know whether I invented it or not, but it seems to me if you can understand this, it's quite an important insight into the way things work. Basically, the narcissistic exchange principle says a leader will say to the congregation, you worship and adore me and say, well, how wonderful I am. And in return, I will tell you how important you are. It's a circle. It's a circle which goes on indefinitely. But it's very bad for both parties. Narcissism is being fed by each other, and nobody is actually very close to reality. Now, the charismatic, if you like, the fun part of fundamentalism in Britain, or England in particular, is very much a phenomenon imported from the States, I should say. It was from about 1985. It goes back earlier than that, but John Wimber is a very key person in the appropriation and inspiration of the charismatic impulse. And the evangelicals tend to identify with the charismatic or with the Calvinistic or the non-charismatic strand. The cultic tendencies that you find within the charismatic strand are very much to do with the way that large crowds are manipulated and the hypnotic use of music. This is a subject about which I'm very interested, but I wish I could find more information. The use of crowds and music to soften up, if you like, the group for manipulation and power games. Now, the latest scandal, if you like, to hit the Church of England, and I say hit because it's really, if you think of the Church of England like a ship, this is quite a torpedo under the shoreline. Mike Pilavachi, he's had a 30-year ministry running a church in Watford within the charismatic evangelical tradition. And he's had to step back within the last couple of months. And the problem, of course, is that he's known, he's been honored by the church. He's been given the Lambeth Cross. He's been given an MBE by the Queen or the Queen, it would be. And up to 500,000 young people in Britain have been to one of his camps. And then suddenly overnight, it is declared that Mike Pilavachi first was stepped back and then he's suspended. And it has caused an enormous ruckus right at the very center of the church. And I run a blog called Surviving Church, and I wrote about Mike Pilavachi. And I said, well, when it first sort of got mentioned, he'd step back. And then we were told we mustn't talk about it because he hasn't been accused of anything and the police aren't even interested. I just pointed out that if you say Mike Pilavachi stepping back, safeguarding in the same sentence, you're bound to create a certain interest. But what was interesting was that a member of the Archbishop's Council viciously attacked me through the blog and told me to withdraw it and saying it's all lies and everything. And I thought, well, people don't react like that unless they're really, really upset. And it's obvious the Archbishop of Canterbury has been deeply wounded by his association with Mike Pilavachi. Well, what he was accused of was, again, homoerotic abuse, massages, wrestling, all kinds, and also, not just that, incredibly cruel treatment of individuals. One minute he would favor somebody, and then somebody else would come along and he would just drop them like the stone, having created a dependency relationship with that young man. And we haven't had any report back. There's a lot of discussion about who should investigate him. And of course, the Church of England's record on investigating cultic behavior is very poor. They simply don't understand the dynamics of what happens when big characters like this one come along and wow everybody, and then having softened them up with 3/4 of an hour of gospel singing and having just by the sheer force of personality sold a particular line. And I say that the Church of England is and will be in crisis until this one is faced up to. We don't know when that will be. Now, I started off beginning saying Cultic Christianity is not really compatible with institutional Christianity or denominational Christianity. It undermines it. We would recognize the way that cults are frequently built on the sand of the human appetite for power, sex, and money. I defy anybody to come up with any other motivation which goes where somebody is running a cult for their own ends, which doesn't involve one of those three or more than one. But the counterbalance is honesty, transparency, and general altruism in leaders alongside genuine belief. At the moment, our leaders, I say the Church of England leaders, are showing very little sign of putting those values forward, as opposed to protection of the institution, like the vicious attack was made on me online over my just saying, we've got to discuss, this is news, be prepared, or words to that effect. And when the large institutions like the Church of England are found to have cultic dynamics working, trust begins to eat at the foundations of the reputation and integrity of the whole. what we're really concerned about is what people outside the Church of England are thinking and seeing at the moment. And they're seeing people who are not putting integrity, honesty, and truth at the very heart of what they're doing. They're just busy covering their backs and making sure that people think they're wonderful, that they're doing their job well. I mentioned the Titanic. We've had these two icebergs coming along. We could say we've even had two torpedoes. And of course there are other scandals which I haven't told you about. And the big problem for the church at the moment is the whole safeguarding business, the legacy of abuse, power abuse, sexual abuse of children and adults over a long period of time, and everybody wanting to cover it up. If you're a child and you report abuse, it's clearly illegal. But getting through the system, either lawyers or being interviewed, having to tell your story over and over and over again, it's pretty tough stuff. The church can only recover if it allows itself to be scrutinized and make itself vulnerable. Well, it doesn't do that. It protects itself. It all uses lawyers, publicity merchants, and the like. So my final question, I feel quite proud of the fact I've kept within the half an hour. This is my personal challenge, really. I've been studying cultic dynamics within a mainstream situation for quite a long time. I don't think the people at the top have a clue. I say this because I sometimes feel I'm a voice crying in the wilderness. I've been, not obviously the scandals are new, but some of the things that have been going on that just simply haven't been understood. I mean, for example, it is unhealthy to have people idolized because they have a big, powerful personality and presence. It's unhealthy to think that just because you've got 500 young people in a big tent all swaying and singing, that they're all going to become solid, reliable members of your church in the future, just as likely to move on and onto other things. All kinds of questions. And failures of integrity, when you have bishops who actually tell lies to government commissions, it really does have a bad effect. And the evangelicals as a whole are dominant in the Church of England, and they've been making a great deal of fuss about the gay issue, saying you can't be a Christian unless you support our position on what the Bible says about, no to gays. And I asked the question, where are the new generation leaders to come from? The present lot have not stuck up for either the truth of integrity and honesty and truth. They've been allowing themselves to be manipulated, and there has been an undermining of the institution by this abusive and cultic behavior. These scandals are very, very serious in terms of the reputation of the church for the future. Why anybody would want to be ordained into the church at the moment, I really don't know. I'm an ordained priest. I don't think I'd quite want to start again into a church which is being compromised as it is at the moment. And I said, can the Church of England survive the next generation? Well, that's I can't answer that question, but I would just suggest that unresolved abuse issues, cultic tendencies, which are undigested and not understood, do appalling damage to the integrity and the structure of an institution like the Church of England. Thank you.